A tourist threw a bottle at the guard's feet, thinking he could get away with anything. One step from the guard shocked the crowd and turned the moment into an unforgettable lesson. Against the majestic backdrop of Buckingham Palace, where the ornate golden fence gleamed in the sunlight and the palace's white columns reflected the morning light, stood a royal guard. A tall, fit man in his early 30s, with fair skin and piercing blue eyes, he was the embodiment of discipline and tradition. His red uniform was pressed to perfection, his polished boots shone brightly, and his iconic bearskin hat loomed high, emphasizing his stature. The guard stood motionless, as if he were a part of the palace itself, a living symbol of British grandeur. Meanwhile, the scene around him buzzed with the usual energy of a tourist hotspot. Boisterous groups snapped photos of everything in sight. Laughing children clung to their parents, and young people posed for dramatic selfies. But one individual disrupted the picturesque scene, a lean man in his 40s. With messy blonde hair, a flushed face, and a wild glint in his eye, he looked like someone who had started drinking far too early. He clutched an empty beer bottle, swaying slightly and laughing loudly, as if amused by his own antics amidst the chaos. "Hey, look, it's that British robot," he suddenly yelled, raising the bottle above his head like a trophy. His sharp voice cut through the crowd, making several people turn to see what was going on. It was immediately clear who his target was: the guard. Here he was, this tourist, brimming with confidence in his supposed immunity. In his mind, everything seemed perfect. He'd paid for his flight to London, and that entitled him to more than just a photo with a guard. It earned him a show. Traditions, respect, clearly not part of his agenda. "Hey, buddy, do you even know you're getting paid just to stand there like a tree?" he continued, his voice loud and taunting, as if hoping the entire crowd could hear him. The crowd reacted in mixed ways. Some chuckled, unsure if it was a joke or something more serious. Others looked uncomfortable, while a few had already pulled out their phones to start recording. After all, there's nothing like witnessing someone make a fool of themselves in public. It's a guaranteed hit on social media. "How about some beer?" the man added mockingly, swaying closer to the white line that clearly marked the boundary no one was supposed to cross. By now, the crowd's murmurs were growing louder, with disapproving comments floating through the air. "Who does that? This is just too much." But the man only grew bolder, encouraged by the attention. Waving the empty bottle in the air, he smirked with an air of defiance and called out again. "What's the matter? Aren't you going to say anything? Maybe smile for the camera?" Then, as if to underline his complete disregard for decorum, he threw the bottle at the guard's feet. It clattered softly against the pavement, coming to rest near the guard's gleaming boots. The crowd froze. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Some gasped, others whispered loudly, and those standing closer reached for their phones to record the moment. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Feeling emboldened by the crowd's attention, the tourist straightened up and mockingly mimicked throwing an imaginary ball. Then he began dancing erratically in front of the guard, his movements as chaotic as his thoughts. In his mind, he was the star of the show, a comedian playing to an audience. But in reality, he looked more like a character from a low-budget comedy. "Come on, buddy. Show us you're not a robot," he shouted, taking a few steps forward. And then, the ultimate offense. He crossed us across the white line. Yes, the very line every tourist knows is a strict boundary. Do not cross. The crowd stirred. Some whispered about the man's reckless behavior, while others kept recording, eager to capture a moment destined to go viral. A few, however, couldn't hide their outrage. "Hey, enough! This is too much!" An older man with a camera shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "Show some respect for his job," added a young woman holding her son's hand, But the tourist ignored them, turning back to the crowd with a smug grin, as though addressing adoring fans. "Relax, people. It's just a joke. What? The Royal Guard doesn't have a sense of humor?" At this point, anyone watching had the same thought. What's wrong with this guy? His actions were no longer funny. They were crossing every line of decency. The man bent down as if to pick up the bottle he had tossed earlier. The crowd held its breath. Could he actually be planning to clean up his mess? Of course not. Instead, he pretended to throw something else, making a show of his defiance right in front of the guard's face. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. "This is just embarrassing," one man muttered while filming. "Look at him. He actually thinks he's cool," another said with open sarcasm. And then it happened. The guard, who had stood motionless like a statue this entire time, suddenly took a step forward. The sharp sound of his polished boots striking the pavement shattered the tense silence. "Step back behind the line and pick up your trash, now!" the guard barked. His voice was firm, sharp, and loud enough to silence even the rowdiest child in the crowd. The tourist froze, his smug expression vanishing in an instant. His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights. The crowd erupted. Applause, laughter, and cheers rang out as people celebrated the guard's powerful response. Phones captured every second, ensuring the moment would live on as a viral sensation, and as an unforgettable lesson in respect. The tourist, standing on the wrong side of the white line, abruptly lost his fake composure. The judgmental stares of the crowd burned into him just as much as the sharp words being thrown at him from every direction. His face, which moments earlier had been full of brazen confidence, now betrayed a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Slowly, he bent down and picked up the empty bottle, as if it weighed a ton, and stumbled back behind the boundary line. "Hope you'll remember this moment for the rest of your life," someone in the crowd shouted, immediately met with laughter and approving cheers. The tourist, who just minutes earlier had basked in his triumph, now looked utterly defeated. His eyes darted nervously around, searching for an escape, while the corners of his mouth twitched as if he was trying to come up with an excuse. But the crowd wasn't letting up. "Great example of class," a woman with a stroller said sarcastically, clutching her phone. "This is why tourists ruin everything," added a young man in a baseball cap, capturing the scene on video. Each comment seemed to hit the mark, chipping away at the fragile remains of his confidence. But the most humiliating blow came when someone in the crowd called out with a mocking tone, "It's already on TikTok, buddy. Enjoy your fame." If the tourist had been red-faced from alcohol before, his face now burned with pure shame. He mumbled something under his breath, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but his words were lost in the noise of the crowd. With one final glance at the guard, who remained motionless and dignified as if nothing had happened, the man turned abruptly and disappeared into the crowd, walking as quickly as he could. The crowd erupted into cheers. People applauded loudly, voicing their admiration for the guard's composure and professionalism. Shouts rang out, "A real hero! That's what I call discipline." The guard, as though he hadn't heard a single word, silently resumed his original stance. His body became perfectly still again, and his gaze remained fixed in the distance, as if he wasn't looking at the crowd but at centuries of British history standing behind him. This moment became a vivid reminder for everyone present. True strength lies in calmness and dignity.